Out here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week, it's going to be the turn of Nick Evans, who I spoke to very recently to find out more about life, love, poetry, and all that other groovy stuff. Anyway, he founded Elemental Records and also was part of Alternative Tentacles and had a partnership with One Little Indian, but during his squatting time in Leeds, used to put on bands at the Duchess in Leeds. Indeed he did. Anyway, look, this is the conversation. You're going to learn a lot, so take notes. I will test you at the end. So, after several minutes of casual chat, we got down to that fascinating subject that was the early formative years. Nick, tell us more. Tell us everything.
I did. I was born in 68. So my parents were really into music. So they were sort of working class people from Caerphilly, Sing Henniff and Swansea. So very sort of poor, really. But they both sort of left their working class roots and identities by becoming Francophiles and French lecturers at Cardiff University. So they were friends with Georges Brassens and Jake Thackeray and lots of French singers, Barbara, and I grew up with a lot of kind of Leonard Cohen and Jake Thackeray and Tom Paxton, some Bob Dylan. When I was very little, my dad playing Mozart and sort of twirling around the living room and listening to Blue, Joni Mitchell. And so there was a lot, and of course, Sgt. Pepper's and Get Stoned, which was a double early Rolling Stones record. Yes. I think I went off to see... with my dad, Tom Paxton and Leo Sayer, very, very sort of early things, concerts when I was probably not even 8 or something, you know. And then when I was 11, let me think, my dad's friend, Hank Coombs, who was one of the lecturers, an American lecturer at Cardiff University, took I love the Clash, you know. I'd given enough rope and I had... Ziggy Stardust, and I had It's Alive, the Ramones double album, and Devo, and I think X-Ray Specs, who I'd seen on Top of the Pops, Day the World Turned Dayglow, and early Stranglers. And I think I saw the Clash on the 16 Tons tour, supported by Mikey Dread, when I was 11. I saw the Jam on the Setting Suns tour and the Stranglers on the La Folie tour.
Right.
Before I was 12 at Sophia Gardens. Nobody believes me now. I did another interview and I mentioned that, and a bunch of people in the comments was like, "Oh, that guy's a big bullshitter." But it's true, you know. I went off on Hank Coombs' shoulders and watched the Clash doing a lot of the London Calling material. But I think the first song I ever learned to play on the guitar was You Really Got Me by the Kinks. I had the greatest hits of the Small Faces. I learned to play Ziggy on the guitar I had sort of an Ibanez Les Paul and some shitty homemade amp, you know. Yes. I learned to play that. And I remember Slade very well, very fond of Slade. I think that, you know, I had Knowing Me, Knowing You by ABBA. I had the Grease soundtrack. So there was a lot of music. And I remember saying to my mum and dad when I was sort of maybe 6 or 7, I want all the music. I want all the music. It was ferocious. Right. And it was non-negotiable. I was like a junkie or something, you know. I just couldn't.
That's amazing. Your parents were so hip to the groove, actually, on this.
They were nice, you know. They were good to me, and they were so kind of supportive. You know, I got this band together, Slaughter Tradition, at the age of sort of 13 or something, and my dad, you know, he lent me 80 quid to hire out the Paget rooms in Penarth so that Kukul and Flux of Pink Indians and Chumbawamba and my band could play. He would drive me to all the gigs, you know, with the drums in the back of the Datsun Cherry. And my mum left the house for a few days, but my dad stayed when Flux and Chumbers all stayed at the house. And I remember going to Crass's last ever gig in Aberdare. And my dad took me and Pseudo and Sado. Pseudo played as a poet, a trans poet, actually, maybe the first trans person I ever met. But
I would have thought that was yes, you're right.
It was very, very, very early days. And my dad came in, watched the last Crass gig, and hung out afterwards. And we chatted with Penny and all of them really for hours afterwards before my dad drove us home. Matthew, the bass player from Slaughter Tradition, still runs Tangled Parrot Records in Carmarthen and a new one in Swansea. So maybe one of the greatest record shops I've ever been to, with one of the most sort of gifted curators of music I've ever met. And he just released my album, which I don't know if you had a chance.
Yes, I did. I gave it a play, which was yes.
Well, thank you very much for listening to it. I was a bit late to the party, but I had to do it for Morgan. Really, it was, it was for my boy. But
so were your parents political? I mean, because I'm thinking you as the 80s progressed, we had that great period, didn't we, where things, the kind of the 70s, I've still felt quite very young in the 70s, so the news was just an abstract thing, but you got the kind of idea that there was a different prime minister on a regular basis, different party in sort of power, and then that would change. And then 79, obviously things suddenly stuck, and it hasn't really felt like it's changed since. So, the Thatcher years, and then we obviously had the Falkland, the miners' strike, Greenham Common, and Red Wedge. So you were a little bit, you would have probably just started to catch Red Wedge before the great sort of anti-poll tax league suddenly kicked off.
Yeah, I was, my dad was, we were all Labour people. My grandfather was a sort of liberal, but my dad and my mum were strong Labour people. It was all the Guardian round our house, because the Guardian was sort of an identity as much as it was a sort of newspaper, and I think that a lot of people from our generation, identified with the Guardian. I'm not so keen anymore, actually, but it's a bit sort of the root of the doom scrolling, I think, starts with the Guardian now. But at the time, it was all coal, not dole, and I was very, very active in CND. And I remember after that Clash gig that I went to, it was very clear that Rock Against Racism and the Anti-Nazi League were where it was at, So my dad took me to an Anti-Nazi League meeting in Cardiff, and which was followed by a troops out of Northern Ireland. And so my dad was sort of quite supportive, really, of me being a little kind of radical kid.
Yes, I mean, this is quite,
It was good. It was good. I was sort of clear, but I remember going to a Joan Ruddock you remember Joan Ruddock? She was the leader of the CND for a long time. I think she's a Labour politician as well. And she did a talk at Cardiff University, and me and all the class war conflict horrors, all these sort of little bastards showed up and started shouting, it's not just nuclear weapons that need to be got rid of, it's all weapons, we need to demilitarize the world. And we were really sort of quite violent, really, they were sort of, we were really willing to go the whole distance, and it just sort of kept going, really, never mind conflict. There were thousands of us, and we were really up for it.
Yes,
let's have a proper revolution. Come on, which, as I said, when I was sort of on my own, I didn't really have those tendencies, because there was a lot of tough kids at school, and I got my nose broken a few times for being a big puff, wearing eyeliner and having lots of hair and all that, and being into The Cure and Adam and the Ants or whatever it was at the time. And so there was a lot of getting duffed up. But when there was a big group of us on the poll tax in London or trying to take on the fascists in Leeds, in Lands Lane, with a couple of chumbers there and a bunch of other sort of nutters around with spiky hair, we were a lot stronger together.
Yes.
And that idea that, you know, being anarchy, peace and freedom and being a pacifist just wasn't going to work, and things had gone too far, and that, you know, it's our world too, and we're really going to put our money where our mouths are and show up and not leave it to the next generation. You know, it was time to really...
Yes.
So it's why, in a way, I had a sort of soft spot for... I didn't like conflict very much, but I understood how they'd arrived at that conclusion.
Yes, I absolutely. So as the 80s trucked on, did you leave school at 16 or did you stay on?
All of it. I was just a nutter, mate. It was just... I moved to Cardiff with a bunch of sort of punky people. The band broke up, my little band, after our one demo cassette, The Passion Revolt, which you can find bits and bobs from on YouTube if you have a sniff around, you know. Really, really influenced by the mob, you know. So that my heart was sort of broken then, because the band had gone, and Matt, who I've been talking about, and Tom, they both went off to university to up north. Matt went to Huddersfield University, and he was sort of getting more into gong and Hawkwind and being a bit more of a crusty traveller. And there was sort of that side of it was sort of dragging him off.
Yes. So when did you have your first Glastonbury in the sort of 80s?
Oh yeah. I was off to me and Fish, who's still a very good friend of mine, or his name's Richard actually, who's the bass player from Icons of Filth. He was the guy that introduced us all to being vegan and hunt sabbing. So we used to go off. Yes. We lived in Cardiff, and you know, Fish would drive us. He had a van. His parents were bakers and had a bakery in somewhere in the valleys, and we used to go out and go hunt sabbing with him, and we were part of the Cardiff Hunt Sabs. But then he would say, "Oh, come on, let's go off to." We went to what was it? Not Greenham Common, to a couple of sort of Stonehenge-y but not Stonehenge festivals.
Because the Windsor festivals had been on, hadn't they?
Yeah, I didn't get to the Windsor Fest. I was sort of definitely after that. It was around Greenham Common time, and we went off to... It wasn't Menwith Hill. Where the hell was it? It was near Amesbury Festival, and we went to try and go to Stonehenge, but it was just as the Battle of the Beanfield and all that stuff was going on, so we parked up outside Stonehenge with about 50 other vans and ended up going to some other thing, and then we broke into Glastonbury a couple of years running through the fence. And
yes. So when was your first Glastonbury?
I think it must have been sort of 88 or 89, you know, or 80.
It wasn't 87 then.
It might have been. I don't know. You know, I was a bit nervous about this interview because I thought he's going to ask me for all, you know, all these sort of. I listened to Kaz Brown, who I used to know, who's good friends of Lawrence. You know, me and Lawrence were very close for years. You know, and Kaz, the drummer from the Senseless Things. You know, Kaz was one of Lawrence's crew, the sort of Putney crew, and I just listened to Kaz, and he had this sort of photographic memory, and he was talking about all sorts of dates and people and the number of the house and all this. I was like, Jesus Christ, I hope he doesn't ask me that level of detail, because, you know, if you can remember the 80s.
You weren't there.
You weren't there.
I wondered if you had tried to go and see Husker Du in the afternoon.
Yeah, I saw them. I saw Husker Du. I was there.
It was 87 you went.
Me and Zippy dancing to Husker Du with a bunch of other nutters at 11 o'clock in the morning until some bestudded punk got his stud caught in my eyebrow. And I sort of covered in blood dancing to New Day Rising or whatever it was, you know, some Husker Du classic with Zippy. Just me and Zippy were the only... But I'd seen them at Stowe Hill Labour Club in Newport,
right,
with the Butthole Surfers very early as things started to transition into a more kind of hardcore, which was my scene for years in Leeds. And I remember Husker Du and my forehead being dragged along. And yeah, me and a few of the Leeds people really sort of understood some of that early hardcore. Yeah, we were sort of definitely shifting from Amiga Tribe and Peni and all of that into a more US influence thing. But I thought that that was later.
Husker Du was 87.
87, yeah, well, I was there. Yeah, I remember it very well. And they were fantastic, actually.
Yes, I wondered if... yes, that was the Friday afternoon. That was my first Glastonbury. And I thought, I wonder if you were there as well.
Yeah, I was. I remember somebody feeding me mushrooms and, just, really losing all sense of...
So when did you make the move to Leeds? Did you not make the move to Leeds?
Around that time, because I was with Zippy in 87 at Glastonbury, watching Husker Du. So I must have been in Leeds by 87. Just as sort of, because, Chumbawamba had a big effect on a lot of us, because they were sort of, in a way, not towing the crass. I mean, I visited Dial House a few times at that point, and I really loved Crass's sort of, I read Knots by R.D. Lang. I read, interesting, strange books and listened to, I don't know, maybe I listened to
did you read
Benjamin Britten because of Crass, because I'd read an interview with Penny where he said, actually, I don't listen to punk at all.
No, he loves jazz.
But he loved a lot of classical music as well. And, I heard John Coltrane because of Penny, and, and read Kerouac because of Penny, and I always really loved Penny and G and all of Crass, really. But the fact that they had this sort of avant-garde, bohemian beatnik roots, and the whole story about, the Windsor Free Festivals and Wally Hope and all of that really attracted me. And when we went up to Leeds for the first time, me and Sado Monaliki Huron, who was part of the Doe family that I mentioned earlier on, who'd all taken this name, and were sort of all kind of dancing around being trans and genderless and all this sort of stuff quite early on. We loved Poison Girls and all that. But in Leeds, there seemed to be, in a way, a much more sort of advanced squatting community. I went to Bristol a few times. And like I say, we played at the Demolition Ballroom, and I was into Amoebics, heavily into Amoebics, because they had this sort of slightly hippie element to their thing, to Smart Pills and all these sort of sub-Hawkwind bands. But the scene in Bristol was a bit scary. I got offered a job at Suma Whole Foods. So that was one option, to go and work for Suma, and we like their vegan margarine. So I was like, maybe I should go and work for Suma Whole Foods. But actually, the people I know in Bristol, there was a lot of glue bags around.
Right.
And a lot of people getting pretty dark quite early on. And even though I was susceptible and interested in the psychedelic end of things, it all looked a bit sad to me. But when we went up to Leeds and Huddersfield and Bradford, just as the Manhattan Club and the 1 in 12 was beginning, and all of this stuff, which I helped sort of put the roof in one of the floors of the 1 in 12 club, and we were quite involved in the 1 in 12. But Leeds was very organised. And these cities, York, Huddersfield, Bradford, Leeds, even down to Sheffield and Bradford and Halifax, and then lots of people moving down from Darlington and Dan and all the guys from Generic. I joined Generic later on, who was sort of, buddies with the electro hippies and Napalm and all that sort of era of things. But they were just very well organised. And Chumbas were living in this huge house, and they had a rehearsal room, a printing press. They were great. They were great. I wouldn't say they were great musicians, but they were very creative people.
Yes.
And they were sort of already writing pamphlets and listening to really, really interesting music and good conversations and involving themselves with the other lead squatters, and lots of organisation. We used to run a little fanzine called Leeds Other Paper.
Oh my God, that's amazing! Yes,
but it wasn't Leeds Other Paper actually. Leeds Other Paper was published by our sort of predecessors. This was the Other Paper, or what was it called? We published it for a long time. I told you my memory isn't what it was, but we used to cut out the TV schedule from the Radio Times and put it in there along with a bunch of, we're going to, vote nobody cares for you, nobody's going to change the country, nobody's going to, and organise kind of demonstrations and actions through this paper.
Yes.
And Chumbers was sort of a bit involved in that. And the organisation, the squatting, we had a great house, number 1 Birchwick Grove. And, one of the guys from the Apostles lived there. And there was Andrew Bales, who took the photograph that made Banksy very famous, which is, as I told you, me throwing a kind of fake petrol bomb in a disused warehouse with my friend Becky and Dallas, who took all the photographs of that period. You can track down a lot of the amazing...
My God. Yes. I was just going to say this, that name Dallas. There's a really interesting book which might be downstairs. Shit. It probably is. Anyway, there was a guy who's done a book about all the tribes in the 80s. I mean, I didn't realize there were quite so many,
Dallas's pictures are in there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I heard about that.
Of the Crusties, there's one on Crusties, and
that's
it's like
all him.
That's
and
him.
He was our little crew. We had a crew called Flame in Hand. I sort of realized that the anarcho-punk thing was sort of transitioning into a lot of the early hardcore stuff that was coming from the States. So it was Minor Threat and the Bad Brains, and we were all beginning to listen to Circle Jerks and
what about Sonic Youth?
That was all much later. So
right.
that happened, but it happened sort of maybe 4 years after that initial rush of the hardcore stuff, Minor Threat, Dead Kennedys.
Yes.
So I think everybody realized, Crass had called it a day, Flux had become, Tackhead and the Adrian Sherwood thing. So people were looking around. I remember going over to Liverpool and seeing De La Soul and, Public Enemy, and going to Reading Festival, and maybe Sonic Youth had played already. We were listening to Daydream Nation, but really it was that sort of first flush of American hardcore, which was a whole nother level of musicianship, Scream and Beefeater and a lot of the DC stuff, as well as the Germs and some of the West Coast things. But it was just sort of clear. And I went to the States around that time. People were beginning to listen to the Happy Mondays and the Stone Roses, and
so at this stage, had you taken ecstasy?
I resisted, because a lot of our crew were selling all their punk records and wearing ponchos and sort of disappearing off to not necessarily the Hacienda, but some of the early Leeds, Orbital, some of the early Leeds techno clubs, and I think, what was it? Well, I forget the names of some of them. What were they called? Well, some of these Leeds clubs, but I found it all a little bit suspicious, because it seemed to change people so dramatically and people got loved up very fast. And I was still wanting to change the world, and I was still, vegan and into the politics. And we ran Flame in Hand, and we were putting on everyone really, Naked Raygun, we put Fugazi on, we put Nirvana on, at Leeds Poly.
Were they supporting Tad?
They supported Tad at the Duchess of York, but when we did them, it was Nirvana, L7, Victims, Family and Arm.
Not Jacob's Mouse.
No, they were later. They were Gary Ouija, who was another good friend of mine, part of another crew. I'm still in touch with Gary. Gary's very sweet.
Because he pulled together Silverfish, who I just loved at the time.
Yeah, and Leslie was an old flame of mine, actually.
Was she? My God.
Yeah. But this is all later. You've jumped a big chunk,
So when did you discover Thatcher on acid? Because
they were friends from before. They were friends from the Chumbers era. They were around a lot. We used to stay at their house in London. They were good friends. And Ben and Sean Forbes, who ran Rugger Bugger and was in Wat Tyler, and then Sean and Ben were in Hard Skin and all that. And Sean was working at Rough Trade, and when I first started going down to London, down to Gypsy Hill, and I lived in Streatham and in Brixton, and was part of that whole with Jamie from Scarfo and all the people. He went on to be Jamie from the Kills with Alison Mosshart, and
my God, the Kills.
I took Lawrence from Domino to Jamie's flat for the first time, and because I was part of that whole scene really, and Ben. Well, we loved Thatcher on Acid, but really the linchpin was Sean Forbes. Sean Forbes is the key figure, really, that connects all of that American hardcore stuff. Fugazi, we put Fugazi on a few times. I went to the States and I drove across the States with Hetty from Deconquerent and stayed at Discord House and hung out a lot with Ian Mackay and all of that scene.
Did you come across a band called Seven Year Bitch?
Yeah, I knew them. I didn't know them personally, but I knew the band. But my crew really was Fire Party, who were the first sort of all-female DC punk band who I booked a tour for. I booked tours for No Means No and Alice Donut and Verbal Assault and Neurosis and Shudder to Think, all these bands that were sort of the first era of, well, not the second era of Discord and Alternative Tentacles bands. And I started booking Peel sessions for a lot of these bands and getting them in the Melody Maker and in the NME. And that's when I started meeting all the NME people and John Peel. And then later I put out a lot of records myself through Elemental Records, which was...
But Shudder to Think is such amazing. That I've done an interview with the lead sort of bloke.
Craig Wedren, very talented,
so talented.
Amazing.
Yes. So as the 80s progressed, because obviously you didn't sort of embrace the world of indie pop, did you, with the Smiths and?
Yeah, I mean they came later. I loved REM. I loved the Shop Assistants. I loved particularly. It was always a bit more American for me, but I knew the Field Mice and I knew, Sean was into a lot of Tallulah Gosh and all of these kind of, but for me, I didn't love it. I loved the Shop Assistants actually. Yes. I thought they were really, really good. And I knew the Pooh Sticks because they were from Wales and I knew some of that stuff, but I'd definitely gone off more into hardcore and booking these tours for all these.
Because Amelia and who from the Pooh Sticks have got this one called the Swansea Siren. They did a collaboration.
I just met him a couple of months ago. I was in Swansea at Matthew's shop, and Matthew said, "I'll go and get Hugh," and brought Hugh in, and me and Hugh spent sort of 3 hours discussing all the people that we had in common and all the stories. He knew another one of my exes, Rachel, from he had a deal. He had Townhouse Music, who had a deal with Charlie Pinder at Sony, and so I knew Charlie Pinder, and my ex worked there after she worked at Island Records. So I had a whole sort of trajectory through from sort of anarcho punk down to London, where I took a job with Alternative Tentacles Records because I booked a lot of their tours,
right,
as well as a lot of the stuff from Southern. So I knew all the people at Southern and I knew all the people at Alternative Tentacles, Bill Gilliam. And Bill Gilliam had a label called Workers Playtime Records, which was connected to Rough Trade.
Yes.
And he had the Higsons and Serious Drinking.
Didn't he have Snuff on that?
Snuff was later. He had S.C. Roji, who was a great African player, world music. He had Benjamin Zephaniah. He obviously had all the AT stuff, and he said, "Why don't you come and take over Workers Playtime?" Because I'd done a good job with the tours and I knew all the bands. And
yes,
he was like, "Come down, we need you." And so Morgan wants to say hi.
Hello, Morgan.
Hello. Yeah.
Hello.
He's got a Sangre de Muerdago Crass T-shirt on.
Nice.
Benefit for the elephants, but. Yeah, Morgan made me promise that I'd let you introduce him, or I would introduce him to you.
Well, that's lovely. No, it's nice.
So I started having some indie hits. I had AC Acoustics and Bivouac and Crane, who I'm still very fond of. And I was booking I was booking Peel sessions for them and getting them in the Melody Maker and the NME, and it was very exciting. And living on the Railton Road with Jamie and Jules from Dan, and also Mark Gatiss, who went on to do the League of Gentlemen, and he was an old friend who I lived with in the squat in Leeds. So there was quite a scene really, and Leslie from Silverfish showed up, and there was Sean and Ben from Thatcher on Acid and Wat Tyler, and we were going to see, going to the Falcon a lot and seeing Roger Cowell's bands from what was his label called? There was Gary from Ouija and Roger and Lawrence, who had Roughneck at the time, and Paul from Too Pure, who run the White Horse in. So we'd see early PJ Harvey concerts, and the Faith Healers, and all those bands. Crane used to come down and play there a lot. So there was a real sort of transition, and a lot of the people who ran those labels, that sort of very early 90s scene, that was Too Pure, Ouija, Elemental to some degree, Lawrence's stuff, Midway Still, and Leatherface. All those bands were it was the next generation, because we'd all heard the Pixies at that point.
Yes,
so everybody realised, oops. Got to keep up.
Well, there was kind of a huge musical. Well, for me, there was a huge musical kind of moment when the Smiths finished in '87. Then Ecstasy came along, and then there was this kind of the dance scene, like we mentioned earlier. But then you had the Seattle grunge scene that came along, and then you had that North London sort of, I suppose, My Bloody Valentine.
Which
Carter the Unstoppable Sex Machine.
But My Bloody Valentine really rearranged everything for everyone, I think. And I have to say, because earlier on you did mention that had you had the Ecstasy at this point, and I hadn't, but I moved down to London, and a very close friend of mine who was the sound engineer for the Wedding Present, Joe Hickey, who accepted a job a bit like me, had got sort of a carrot dangled and ran down to London. And Joe Hickey was already into all that, guy called Gerald and 808 State, and was already nipping over to Manchester, and the record collections were changing, and everybody, have you heard this? And I'm like, oh God, a million times, shut up.
So you had because there was Bad Moon PR, wasn't there? Anton.
Yeah, Ginny and Anton.
So
Anton, very sweet.
So he sort of had the Orb, didn't he? He was one of the first people promoting the Orb.
Yeah, that's right. And I remember, I have to say Joe Hickey, because he accepted a job at Vox magazine, being the picture editor. And he was like, oh, you've moved down too. And I was living in Brixton, and he was living in Brixton. And he said, well, I'll meet you at Cambridge Circus. We'll have a pint. So I met him at Cambridge Circus, and I'd not tried any of this, and he dragged me off to a club called Deja Vu, which was underneath Heaven. And I'd work the next morning. I was working at Alternative Tentacles at this point. I had my second record coming out, the Bivouac 7-inch or something, and he said, oh, come on, I'm going to take you to this place. And I was like, oh, I got to go to work. It's already 11:10. He's like, oh, fuck that, come on. And so I went with Joe Hickey, who we all used to call Hot and Stripey, and he ended up being Superchunk sound engineer, and Yola Tango and Rocket from the Crypt. And we had a long friendship. He was involved with all the American stuff. But he took me underneath sort of 3 car parks underneath Heaven. And we ended up in this weird, I thought it looked like some weird youth club. Everything sprayed fluorescent and lollipops on the door. And, and I was like, what the fuck is this? This is some acid house club, you bastard. I'm not into all this. And he said, oh, it doesn't matter. Open your mouth. And it was because it was Joe. I did, and he put some Dove or something under my tongue. And like I say, I'd managed to avoid all of that in Leeds.
Yeah.
And stuck to my guns, and stuck to the Flaming Hand thing, and all the tours I was booking, and all the Peel session thing and all that. And within sort of 15 minutes, I was raving, and I sort of didn't stop really for about 4 years. And it really did change me and change everything. I ended up Yeah, I ended up sort of with one foot in one camp and another foot in the other camp, and a bit of a schism in a way in terms of my musical identity. But I loved Underworld, I loved Orbital, I loved the Left Field record. I went to a lot of those things and met a lot of those people, and there were a lot of people, in a way, I think, like me, trying to sort of navigate this shift of identity that the chemicals elicited or demanded, and I remember sort of hanging around in New York with Rocket from the Crypt at Kennedy from MTV's flat with all of Rocket from the Crypt, trying to explain Underworld to them. And they were going, but it never actually happens. It's a waiting game, Nick. At least rock and roll happens. Techno and house music, it just teases you for 9 hours and it never gives you what you're looking for.
Right.
And that's why everyone's necking the pills and looking for horrible chemicals, is because rock and roll gives you what it is that you're after. Right. Rock and roll is the payback, and techno is the never, never. Yes. And I was like, oh my God. And I remember it happened quite a few times because I used to hang around with those guys a lot in San Diego and in New York, and every New Year's for 4 years with Rocket from the Crypt or Drive Like Jehu, which is another era. But it was very exciting for me because we had hits, and at the same time I was doing Alabama 3, who had the theme music to The Sopranos and were absolute Brixton country and western acid house kind of gurus in South London, still going 40 years later or something.
Amazing. So look, as we trucked over the 80s there, the late 80s.
Oh yeah, sorry.
I mean, the anti-poll tax, were you kind of, it sounds like you were there. We were you weren't just wearing baggy clothes.
No, I was down with Ben and all of them, Sean, and all the people who weren't afraid of the police, and there was a lot of that going on, and a lot of standing up and fighting back, and trying to put our money where, and that whole conflict at the feeding of the whatever it was called, that big gig at Brixton Academy. I was at that, and Thatcher on Acid and Benjamin Zephaniah played at that actually, but. Yes. We're sort of getting some of the epochs sort of a bit jumbled, which is fine as far as I'm concerned. But
yes, well, there was just kind of, I just remember there was that moment which was kind of huge, wasn't it? And and suddenly the following year, after a whole decade with Thatcher, she sort of goes, and it's almost unbelievable. But on the back of an interesting evening,
it was great. But it was a sort of. It was a period when, politicians were what they appeared to be, so Thatcher was, heartless and cruel. And it was very clear that she was heartless and cruel, and it was a sort of succession of people it was before, Peter Mandelson and Tony Blair kind of said, maybe we can play dress up and pretend to be really nice and actually disguise ourselves and sort of whip the populace into a sort of state of confusion, so that nothing is as it seems to be. And of course, when Tony Blair showed up, I think we were all, Noel Gallagher included, like, hooray, we've won. He's the good guy. Finally, we got the good guy. And it was sort of, it's very clear now that he was not a good guy.
But with all those election nights, and obviously you might not have voted, but if you had voted, those election nights, you just had that, this is going to be the one, the Neil Kinnock period. And it was like, no, the next period. I remember we went to a party, I think it was like 92, and it was like, this is it, this is going to be the part. And it was like, immediately it was like, oh no, this is the worst election of all time. John Major's back.
Well, there's one thing when the bastards get in. And there's another thing when the good guys get in and they turn out to be just as bad as the bastards. And you're like, oh, who am I? I'd always been Cole Not Dole and Arthur Scargill and just sort of full on working class, let's eat the rich, that was the thing. And it was very, very disappointing when it took the Labour Party becoming the Conservative Party in order for them to get into power. And I was very, very touched by Jeremy Corbyn, really. You know, I really seemed like it wasn't just his bicycle and his jam. You know, I've been watching that guy and watching that type of person caring so deeply, that Islington sort of energy, really, you know, where people really were trying to do good. And I mean, and just watching him being sacrificed, really, and sold down. They were probably the most anti-fascist politician that's ever lived, being sort of painted into a kind of fascist corner where he was being accused of all sorts of, you know, all sorts of stuff that I really don't believe he was. You know, he was such a caring guy who cared so deeply. You can't fake that kind of vitriol and that kind of passion. And it ignited in much the same way that Crass did. It ignited the hearts of so many people who really believed that a better world was possible, and recognise in the same way that they did Morrissey, even though he didn't turn out so well, you know,
yes.
in many respects. But I met Morrissey actually in LA with Tav. Tav was a good friend of mine. He's managing Alt J and Wolf Alice now, and Self-Esteem, and you know.
So what period did you meet dear old Morrissey?
It must have been when I first, in early 2000s, he was living in LA. I was with Ash, and we were in the Viper Room, I think, or one of these clubs. You know, I had a deal with Geffen Records at this point. You know, and I was sort of still not a major label guy, but funding my Elemental thing, which was then with Derek at One Little Indian,
right,
with major label money, which is what a lot of those guys, you know, Mute and Creation and Rough Trade, and lots of the people were taking the 3 songs they recorded with whoever it was, the Boo Radleys or whatever, and taking it over to the States and playing it to David Massey at Epic, or playing it to, we had a lawyer, and that was part of the deal at One Little Indian. I went to One Little Indian because I'd known Derek since the Flux of Pink Indians days, and he'd stayed at my mum's house, and I used to stay at their house quite a lot in Forest Hill. Yes. So I always had the sense that Derek was still an anarcho-punk, really, but you know, he wasn't. and I was sort of, oh, he's not. I mean, he's still a lovely guy, you know, and I have to say he was, you know, he took a punt on my label. He bought my label from Bill Gilliam and gave me sort of 50% of the shares in it, and he'd done that with quite a few people. Right. So that meant that suddenly I was on a plane, sort of going to New York and LA a lot, and signing bands and hanging out in Interscope with Snoop Dogg and you know, all sorts of. Did you ever?
Okay, so I was going to say, did you meet Jimmy Iovine?
Did I meet Jimmy Iovine? I didn't, but I was spending a lot of time with Anna Statman, and I went to, what's his name, another very, very big A&R guy at Interscope called Tom Wally. I went to his summer house and hung out with him a lot. But Anna Statman was my contact at Interscope, because she'd signed Rocket and Jehu and Helmet and Cop Shoot Cop, and maybe even Jim Thirlwell and Fetus. I can't remember if she signed them, but I think she played bass in the Gun Club.
Oh my God.
She had a great pedigree, you know, everyone loved Anna Statman, but really my people were the Geffen people. And yes. And that was, I remember going and having meetings with I just forget some of their names now, which is unforgivable. With I remember the head of Geffen saying to me, when Nick Evans came into Geffen Records, we didn't need to use electricity for a month. So I was sort of getting into this whole kind of bullshit thing, you know, which, and of course my ego was, I think so many people in the music business are just so desperate to be liked, you know, and I was so keen to be recognized, really. And I remember Josh Deutsch at Elektra Records, who'd signed a bunch of kind of Third Eye Blind or one of these bands, you know, post-grungy kind of bands, saying it's Captain It's Captain Personality or something. And, I hadn't sort of really understood that, part of being a decent human being was listening to other people. I'm still very excited to talk to you about all of it. And it's hard for me I sort of revert to type, really. I become a Welsh gobshite from...
So just before we go back a bit, just your Morrissey, because obviously I have an interesting relationship with Morrissey, but I've never met him. But, somebody who meant so much, and then this... in weird change and this kind of some of the things he said that are like,
weird change.
It's kind of,
it's awful.
I'm
awful.
Because, like in David Bowie, it was like just, wow, that was lucky. And, he just sort of seems to get better and better. So that's almost a bit boring. Whereas Morrissey was like, wow to wow. Going from the 80s, those interviews where he's just like so articulate. And I met interviewed lots of people from Manchester who knew him before he was in the Smiths, and they go, yeah, he was just this incredible. And then this kind of some of these ideas and thoughts and, yes. So
I think maybe, he was, what I remember, like I say, I sort of felt for Michael Stipe and REM more than I did for Morrissey. But when the Smiths clicked for me, they really clicked. And I went back to Hand in Glove and This Charming Man and, the earlier stuff, because The Queen is Dead and then Meat is Murder, which was obviously interesting because we were all, fiercely vegetarian, vegan. And then Strange Ways. And those records did really, really affect me because I was listening to Stone Roses and to the Mondays and to some of that stuff because we were so close to Manchester. But I did get the tail end of the Smiths, and I did see the Gladioli, and I did see the Hair, and I did see some of the interviews on Snub TV and the Tube, and I did feel a sense of kinship, and I loved how sensitive he was. I loved the fact he said, I'm asexual, because we were all sort of so disturbed really by the sort of tidal wave of sexuality and who are we, and for someone to say I'm a vegetarian and I'm not gay but I'm not straight because but then listening to these songs where he was clearly trying to tell everyone something, because they were so romantic and sentimental and sensitive, and it ignited an aspect of my personality, which for all of us, I think the macho side of things for men.
Well, it was kind of tricky because at that point, we had the Duran Duran, Wham, who looked, anyway, and then Spandau Ballet, and then you had this kind of whole Trevor Horn production sound, and this kind
which
of like
was very dark,
and you felt like you should be going to those fancy clubs in London and being on and enjoying the Face magazine and hanging out with, you think, geez, I'm such a failure. I'm not even close to that.
No, that's right. I know.
It does make you feel really small.
But Morrissey was a kind of shelter or a refuge for people that did feel sensitive and confused, and it sort of made it okay to be a sensitive man. And I will be grateful for that, because whatever happened to him since then, and I think by the time Bengali's in platforms and Suede Head was happening, and I think that maybe there was love between Johnny and Morrissey, or Johnny and Stephen, and it was unrequited. I mean, who knows? It's just sort of speculation. But when you're not allowed to say I am who I am, then, there's a lot of, there's Nicky Crane, who was on the front cover of the second Oi album, Strength Through Oi. And then it was a picture of him with a shaved head and these tattoos and big sort of 18-hole Dr. Martens kicking the camera, and Gary Bushell writing the sleeve notes. And, 20 years later, we discovered he was a closet homosexual, too frightened to say what his sexual identity was. And maybe there was some of that going on with Morrissey. I don't know.
So what was he? So when you met him, what was the kind of?
he didn't talk to me. He was talking to Ash and Tab, but I was stood on the
right.
privy. That happened a lot. I went to Noel Gallagher's house once, and I had sort of 10 minutes in Noel's company. I remember hanging out with Tom York in Tel Aviv or in Caesarea, because me and Lawrence went over there because Clinic was supporting Radiohead, and hung out for 15 minutes with Tom York. So there's a lot of that.
Right, on the edge.
Yeah, on the sort of the edges, and sort of getting to know people very, very slightly.
So did you manage to, because obviously Rough Trade sort of almost takes down the entire record world.
That's right. I was around when all that was going on.
So how did you, navigate?
RTM, Rough Trade became RTM. It was, around the time that there was Red Rhino and all of the cartel. I started off with my label going through RTM, which had just shifted from being Rough Trade into this new company. And then there was Rough Trade Publishing, Kathy Gibson, and there was of course the shops,
yes.
The Rough Trade shops, and Nigel and Sean and Pete and Jude and all the people at the shops in Ladbroke Grove, and that we knew well. So Rough Trade as an identity was still there, and the culture still existed as this kind of marketing. RTM was Rough Trade marketing. So Elemental went through Rough Trade marketing. So I knew a lot of the people. Bill Gilliam, who was my Alternative Tentacles partner / boss, was running the catalogue, which was an early Rough Trade magazine.
Yes, I've got mine with John Peel, the one with John Peel on the cover.
Oh yeah. So that was made in my office.
Right.
Richard Boone made that. He used to be the Buzzcocks manager, stroke the record label.
Yeah.
So I worked with Richard Boone for quite a few years, or for at least a year in Finsbury Park in our offices before we shifted over to One Little Indian.
So what's your timeline then with Elemental? So when do you sort of start this label?
I started it at the very sort of late 90s. I had Crane, Bivouac, who signed to Geffen Record. Crane, who I'm still close to, Roy and Stephen Malley. Stephen Malley is an absolutely astonishing guitarist now. And for sort of... I'm sorry, I left the timeline again. I'm a lot more interested in the people than I am the dates. But,
yes.
But Stephen Malley released a record as the Horse Loom and continues to record as the Unit Amma. And Roy is in a band who made a demo. So Crane were really they were Fugazi's favourite British band and toured with Fugazi a lot. And they used Rickenbackers. They were sort of something in between kind of Pere Ubu, the Long Riders, Fugazi, and the Jam. They were an amazing, and Husker Du, I suppose. So they bridged a lot of things. And then Bivouac were a kind of Buffalo Tom, Husker Du kind of, but also with a heavy dose of the Melvins. And then I put out Animals That Swim, who had a lot of singles of the week in the NME, and I got to know all the NME people partially through them.
So how did you, just going back slightly, we as the decade, the 90s appeared, and we were
I think the Animals That Swim album was 94.
Because just before or around that time, there was all the Britpop Shine compilations were coming out left, right and centre. Then Creation Records managed to sort of go from being quite very indie to the this is a bit simplistic, to My Bloody Valentine, Sugar, great move.
Yeah,
and Bob Maud. But then they hit, with Oasis. So they managed to, navigate that period so well. So how did you sort of, because often trying to keep on the zeitgeist is very difficult, isn't it? Most people stressful. In one period, just have no idea the next, in 5 years. A lot of the people in the 60s disappeared in the 70s, and people in the 70s just don't get the 80s, etc., etc. So
I'll tell you, if I'd like to stop me if I'm butting into
no that's fine.
I don't mean to be shut you down at all.
No, that's good.
But what I wanted to say is, when I was really little, my mother took me off to learn transcendental meditation.
Right.
I must have been about 8 or 9. And there was a picture of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi and also a picture of the Beatles.
Mm-hmm.
And I got given my Sanskrit syllable and I started repeating. I gave them my pocket money. And I remember seeing John Lennon and George Harrison in the photograph and thinking, you know, I'm somewhere special now.
Mm-hmm.
This is important. And then maybe, you know, 10 years later, I was at Grassroots Community Centre watching Discharge, supported by Insanity Squad, who I think went on to become No Choice. And it was the most ferocious thing I'd ever seen in my life, you know? And I was like, I couldn't be anywhere else on planet Earth right now. This is where life is. This is where God is. This is the most spiritual place on the planet right now.
Yes.
I mean, I'm sure it wasn't, but it felt like it. I saw Crass at the Trinity, not the Trinity, where was it? It's some very violent gig in Bristol where everybody got the shit kicked out of them. And I just remember thinking, you know, nothing else in the world exists apart from Crass now. And I had those moments, you know, I was always looking for that. And and I still am. You know, when I discovered Ashtanga yoga, all these, the sort of after my cancer, which I was going to touch on, after I was diagnosed with cancer and I had all this chemotherapy, and it was a case of it. I remember seeing that advert for the Bisto kids.
Yes.
And it was a cartoon and the Bisto kids were sort of out playing and Mum's gravy came wafting to the playground and the Bisto kids followed the gravy.
They do, yes.
I never stopped following the gravy.
Right.
I'm still following the gravy. And the weird thing about the gravy is sometimes it's music, but sometimes it's not.
Yes.
You know, it changes shape and it dances and it's wherever the Bisto is, you know, and I had that. I remember seeing Nirvana and kind of going, Bisto. And I remember, you know, going to dance to Orteka or, you know, whatever it was, Bisto, you know, popping a pill, I remember seeing Alabama 3 and thinking Bisto. And unfortunately, it wasn't Alabama 3, it was Moby, you know, who had a similar idea, which was this sort of repurposing old Robert
Blues.
Johnson records and country music and filtering it through 808s and 303s. And I remember seeing Rocket from the Crypt and thinking this is James Brown, The Clash and Elvis, and the Descendants and the MC5 all rolled into one. This is everything I missed, you know, and the same would Drive Like Jehu, you know, with just this sort of huge churning krautrock. It was trance music, you know, but made by 4 San Diego guys with guitars, you know, and I was just completely tripping on Drive Like Jehu, because which had come from Slint, really, you know. We were all fell in love with Slint and Bastro and Bitch Magnet and that era of post-Sonic Youth kind of poster children, all these bands that were kind of 1 part Sonic Youth, 2 parts Bullet La Volta, it was just these incredible kind of gatherings of energy, really, you know. And of course now that's what I do. I'm interested and involved in energy, and energy, like, why do some people become savants, or, you know, why is Sid Barrett remembered sort of 50, 60 years later as a sort of genius, or Bowie for that matter, you know, and I don't know, Ronnie Lane not, or you know.
I didn't know poor Ronnie Lane.
Yeah.
Though he did an amazing song called The Poacher. But
yeah, he's a genius.
He's stunning. But did you ever get into things like orgone energy? Did that sort of...
I mean, in the midst of all this very frightening experience and diagnosis, where I had a Ewing's peanut sarcoma, which is a soft tissue tumor, and I'd been sort of hammering it with the best of them around the water rats, and, you know, trying to hang out with Alan McGee or whatever it was, you know, at the time. And that sort of sensitive Nick was the sacrificial lamb, really, to keep on riding that zeitgeist and keep current and keep sort of motivated. And the pressure was very intense then, because I had this deal with Geffen. It was a 5-album deal. It was called a first option deal. So I had to be feeding Geffen and getting on the plane and going to the marketing meetings. And at this point, I was wearing Duffer and St. George and trying to be cool.
Yes.
And actually feeling as though I'd abandoned a very, very sort of creative aspect of myself, which, as I've told you, you know, I was in bands, I was a guitar player, I was a songwriter, and all of that had been, the guitar was in the attic. I was sort of just busy trying to keep up with the NME and Ted Kessler and Mark Bowen at Creation, and Lawrence, who had Domino at this point, and a bit confused about my identity musically, but still very, very, very passionate and very motivated. Still the Bisto guy, yes, looking for where the magic was, you know, really. And of course, all of us who saw, by the time I saw Oasis, they were all already playing big places. But it was clear, whatever you thought about the music, and you know, they were the underclass. I always appreciated working class musicians. Yeah. And whenever there was a working class musician in a position of power, I was with them. You know, I'm really into working class people being powerful. Of course, I knew about orgone energy because of Hawkwind and orgone accumulator and all that. But really, when the cancer started, I'd signed a band who were friends of the Alabama Three called Lowfinger, who used to be Rub Ultra, who were on, not Food, on Hut Records, you know, right, which is another sort of fake indie that was doing the rounds, who had the Smashing Pumpkins and a few good bands. And Dave Boyd, I think he was running that, pretending to be an indie guy. But Lowfinger had some, I thought that they were really, really great, you know, and again, they were a mixture of rock and roll and dance music, and I used to hang out with them a lot. And one of the guys in Lowfinger had a good friend who was a Reiki master, a woman called Alison, who lived in Brixton. And when I sort of showed up, I told Lowfinger, look, it's going to be difficult for me to A&R the record and do the meetings with Geffen and blah, 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 because I start chemotherapy next week, and they told me that, you know, they think they can save my life. And
right. So going back slightly, what happens with your health? You know, what's the moment that you think something's not right?
I had a big lump here, and I'd had a lump in my chest, and I got that checked out, and they said, oh, it's an inflamed xiphoid. I was doing too much. I didn't have any sort of real sort of have friends at that point, really. It was all kind of, how can I put it? It was all, you know, who like friendship had become currency.
Right.
So I was sort of, you know, the relationship I was in, there was sort of professional element to that. And my friendships, there was a professional element to all the friendships too. And they were lovely people. And I'm not saying anything untoward, but everybody was in that position because the stakes were high at that point.
Yes.
Nobody was a D&V fan anymore. You know, everybody was, who's the next Oasis? Is it Campag Velocet or Terrace? You know, and it was just a nightmare, really, because people were trying to force artists that weren't really ready to be something that they weren't. You know, and it was
menswear was never going to make it.
Yeah, all of that, and it was difficult because I think to some extent everybody knew that they were doing something that didn't have the depth of integrity that we all aspired to, and it was painful for our spirits because a lot of us had gotten into music and politics, some of us, because we cared so deeply, because we were affected so deeply, and if a double-decker bus crashes into both of us, to die by your side, the pleasure, the privilege is mine, you know, because we wanted that depth of feeling in our music, you know, whether it was how does it feel to be the mother of 1,000 dead? We could feel how much they cared. It was real. You can't fake that. It's impossible.
Yes.
Nobody's ever done it and got away with it. Never. Nobody.
Yes. So
nobody that stood the test of time. You know, you can't be a faker and touch somebody's heart deeply. And even Oasis had that. You know, they shake along with me. You know, we believed them.
Yes.
And so I suppose, you know, when the doctor said to me, well, that one was an inflamed xiphoid, but this one is a very rare kind of cancer that spreads very quickly into the lungs and the bones. And suddenly I was in the Royal Marsden Hospital. You know, some people came to visit, some people didn't, because of course I was their fear. Everybody was afraid of that. Nobody wanted to hang out with the cancer-ridden loser.
No.
And I had a very, very strong, apart from, you know, the guys from Animals That Swim, Paul Spraggan, who was my lawyer, who's now Adele's lawyer and still keeps in touch and gives me a call even though I'm long forgotten. But this
is around the same time that Lance Armstrong's also been diagnosed with cancer.
Oh, that's a good,
of the brain and the lungs. So I
didn't know him. That was sort of later.
I know. I mean, I wasn't really into cycling then, but I've sort of read and listened to various interviews with him. And
Lance Armstrong. I'm thinking that you're talking about the singer from. The guy who was on Allied Records, who was Sean's friend, but you're talking about the cyclist.
Cyclist. He was only about 23 and suddenly realised he had testicular cancer.
He was before me, actually.
And it was kind of the mid-90s, and then suddenly coughed up blood and then had sort of, you know, brain cancer, the whole lot. And it was like, you're not going to survive.
But he recovered, didn't he?
Completely recovered. It was like one of those complete freaks. So
I'm thinking of Lance Hayne. He's another one who died of cancer, and he was the sort of linchpin of the US anarcho-punk movement and sang for, who did Lance Hayne sing for? We have to, because some people will never forgive me if I don't.
Lance Haynes.
Yeah, come on. It's if I don't remember this. I have to, I'm sorry.
Yes,
Lance, since I remembered his surname.
I know.
Lance Hayne. Let's see if it's Lance Hayne. I don't know if I've spelt it right. This is probably not great for your podcast.
Keep
Lance Hayne of J Church. Remember J Church? He passed away. He passed away. I think Friday, October the 12th. Punk News, 2007. But right. J Church. He was writing a book about anarcho-punk that called Let the Tribe Increase, which was focused quite heavily on the mob and that part of it all. Yeah. So once you said Lance, I immediately jumped to Lance.
Yes,
Hayne,
dear old Lance Armstrong.
Anyway, I'm back with Lance
Armstrong. So what was your treatment? Did you just have to have chemo? Did you have an operation?
I had a lot of chemo. Very strong chemo, sort of 18 hours of chemo overnight, 4 hours off, 18 hours of chemo, 4 hours off, 18 hours of chemo, 4 hours off, 18 hours of chemo, go home. 10 days, all the hair falls out, everything starts hurting. I mean, I won't go into detail, but that's when I became sort of, I won't say religious, but you know, just praying really, please help, please. This is so terrible. Yeah. And I had about 6 sessions of chemo and then a lot of surgery and reconstruction. Really brutal.
Wow, that was.
And then another 6 sessions of chemo, I think, or was it another 4 sessions of chemo? And then radiotherapy. So it was just relentless. And when I got out, you know, I sort of managed to kind of wriggle out of the Geffen deal and talk to Derek, who luckily he'd come to visit me and he paid for my treatment to be private. And there was another guy called Dave from Fat Cat Records, and they had the early Sigur Rós records and
right.
Mum and all those people. And he was down the corridor and I was friendly with him and Alex. And Dave had a non-specific Hodgkinson's, and the One Little Indian building was in Brian Bonner's Making Records, which I heard Colin Jerwood discuss. So they were manufacturing CDs and vinyl and DVDs, and maybe some of the chemicals. Nobody ever knows really, but you know, in my heart of hearts, in the midst of all this kind of bald chemo, where I was disappearing off for Reiki once a week with this woman, Alison, who was friends with Lowfinger and the Alabama Three, I really did get a taste of, you know, I'm loath to say God, because of course, if you say God, you're mental. But I saw a great big sort of sun in my own inner world. And I sort of, to cut a very long story short, because I've told this story before, but I started crying a lot for weeks, weeping, sobbing, and saying it's okay. You know, I was living in Chiswick in a flat, and I remember saying, you know, how many nicks must there be on this street? There must be at least another 4 or 5 nicks. And I bet, you know, we can do without one of them. Maybe it's okay, you know, I'm not beating my heart. I didn't design hands and apples and pears, and I'm not sure there's any scientist that did either. You know, how did eyes learn how to see and ears learn how to hear? And how does every foot know how to have 5 toes on the end of it? How? Where's this architecture coming from? How come apples don't get confused and decide to taste like bananas? How does this work? And I saw light, and it's weird because everyone talks about all the people who've had near-death experiences. They talk about the tunnel and the light, and I saw all that, and I was like, Jesus Christ, you know. And I had no spiritual tendencies or religious tendencies other than this early thing with my mum, who was a very devoted meditator and Buddhist and all this stuff. And so I sort of cried, and I cried and I cried and I cried, and I sort of said, I'm so sorry, whoever's beating my heart. I don't know who you are. I don't know what you are, but I'm not doing it. I'm not digesting my food. I'm not deciding that I like Murmur more than Reckoning. Or, you know, Christ the album less than Stations of the Cross. I don't know what makes me dance when the B-52s come on. I don't know. I'm not fucking doing it. I never studied this at university. I got no idea. But it's not me. I got no idea. I didn't plan this monologue. It's just going blah, 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 just coming out, you know. So something is intelligent. And I don't care what you call it. You know, I think you'd be a fool to call it God, but it's the same energy that made Discharge so fucking incredible in Grassroots. And it's the same energy that made the Mob sing, I wish I could love, it must be fun to love. Because not so many people do it, you know, or Mark Astronaut say all the amazing things that he said, you know. Rest his soul, you know. And it's the same thing that made me feel really moved when I heard Marcus Garvey by Burning Spear, you know. Do you remember the days of slavery? Do you? Because they're still here, you know. And if people stop caring, you know, Boris Johnson and all those fucking hideous pigs are going to eat us all, you know, and it still matters. And if you have a soul, this stuff will still touch you, you know, in a way that, God bless Billie Eilish, but I don't know, you know, I don't know if these kids are being touched in the way that we were touched, you know. And I suppose that the moment I said, well, it doesn't matter if Nick Evans lives or dies really in the grand scheme of things, because I'm not anything to write home about. And Elemental's not really anything to write home about. And the only thing that matters to me is that I finally get around to making my own music, which I've been threatening to do since I was 11. You know, that's all that matters, because everything else is gravy, really. And I felt a weight lift, and I felt myself kind of forgiven, or I forgave myself, or however you want to put it. That, you know, the Christian people say born again, you know, the yoga people, they've all got their language too, which is another huge Ashtanga subculture I've been involved with, along with Mike from the Beastie Boys, and who I spent quite a lot of time with in India studying Ashtanga yoga with the guru there. And a lot of these old music people found Ashtanga yoga, you know, Chris Martin, and there was, you know, Gwyneth Paltrow and Madonna and Willem Dafoe all practicing with Eddie Stern in New York in the early 2000s. And a lot of people I know found that discharge feeling, which is also, you know, the feeling that you had with Bowie or Morrissey, or, you know, all those things, that special feeling that we're all interested in. I found it in the Ashtanga. I found it in the orgone, or the, you know, the prana. It's the life force. It's the thing that leaves the body at the moment of death, which apparently weighs 2.3 grams or something. I forget but there's that film, you know, 2.3 grams, all about what happens between a living body that's not dead yet, and then it dies, and the weight changes. So something leaves, and I'm not sure, you know, I'm sure there's a scientist who would convince us both that that's got nothing to do with the soul. But when I hear, you know, Dr. Ali Mantado or Mutabaruka or Ray Davis or Bowie when he wasn't wearing someone else's head, you know, when people really are singing from the heart, when Joni Mitchell singing Blue, or Steve Ignorant, or you know, Yves Libertine, when people just have the courage to be who they really are, and that spirit speaks through them. Why, but why? You can feel it, you know, you can feel discharge. I don't know why I keep coming back to discharge, but because I suppose, you know, it's funny because they were so pure, and their anger was so deep and pure, you know, and where even Crass had layers of kind of culturalized voices before, you know, you had to dig a little deeper for their purity, but there was something so honest. I got very tired of music when it became knowing, you know, and for me, lots of my old punk friends, when they heard my record, you know, they were like, you know, mate, what's this? What are you doing? You know, and I said, it's the only punk thing. I'm still friends with Sned, who, you know, was the drummer in Generic for many, many years, along with a lot of other really great hardcore bands. One of the first sort of really, really fast drummers that I ever met. And he ran Flat Earth Records in the 80s, and he was and still is a real anarcho hardcore linchpin. A bit like Sean Forbes there in London. But, you know, if you know, you know, Sned and Sean, there are people who kept the fire burning. And, you know, and were there through all of Chumba's incarnations. And they never swayed. They were never dragged along with anything, because they were so clear about who they were and what they felt, you know. And I think that, you know, in some respects, the only thing I could think to do that was punk as Discharge was to say, look how gentle and vulnerable and sensitive I am. You know, because that's where punk come from. The first record I ever bought with my own money was Ever Fallen in Love with Someone You Shouldn't Have Fallen in Love With, from Woolies on Penarth High Street, before Shaved Women, before The Day the World Turned Dayglow, before In a Rut, before all the other stuff. It cost me 39p, and you spurn my natural emotions. You make me feel I'm dirt and I'm hurt. And I was on a plane with the Buzzcocks going to New York once, and they were all ripped to the tits on fuck knows what. And they weren't those sensitive young men anymore. But Pete Shelley was one of the most sensitive songwriters, so gentle, so kind, so open, so willing to discuss things that very, very few songwriters have been brave enough to discuss since. You know, Orgasm Addict, I mean, Promises. It was relentless. How brave that man was willing to be, you know, in the early part of the Buzzcocks. And so for me, the thing that really affected me about punk more than any other musical style really was that there were people who were willing to show how vulnerable and sensitive they were. And that for me made it authentic. And all I was really ever interested in was authenticity. And that's what I tried to do finally with my Dawn Song record, which was to gather all of the strands at the age of 49 or 50, living in the Netherlands, teaching yoga, running a yoga shala. I was sort of thinking, how can I make a record that can honor each different sort of Wurzel Gummidge head I put on throughout all this journey, you know, and didn't betray any of these nicks.
Right.
That sort of, and that's why I wanted to leave a record. When my dad died, he published a book of poetry. And when his died, he published a book called The Aber Valley, which was all about the different surnames in the Aber Valley, the history of the men in the Aber Valley and where all these names came from. And then my dad published a book of poetry called Births, Marriages and Deaths. So there was a sort of family Evans tradition that everybody had to leave their son something. So I made that record. It's called For Morgan, and it's supposed to be a sort of time capsule so that when I'm dead, he can still hear me sing to him, because I've been singing to him. I still play a lot. And
yes.
I'm still a very, I wouldn't say very, but I'm still a musical person. I don't know how. I don't want to sing, but it's very important to my sort of mental, spiritual, emotional, physical health to never put the guitar back up in the attic and never become, you know, an auxiliary figure in my relation to music.
Yes.
You know, I'm because I couldn't survive that a second time. I survived it once, but it would be a great deceit, you know, a great betrayal of my artistic nature, you know, which is, as I told you earlier on, you know, was there from a very, very young age and has been, it's very scary to bear yourself in that way and to sort of. So I sent this Dawn Song record, which took 3 years to make and a lot of money and a lot of time and to find the right people. I found a few people who really believed in me and the songs, and very technically quite gifted musicians who were willing to sort of not see me as a yoga teacher.
Yes.
I've been in a lot of yoga books and yoga films, and that's another whole sort of subculture that I got a certain level of visibility in. And these were people who were like, no, we think you're a songwriter and your songs are good. And one of them was a classic English horn player and an oboist who spent her sort of, you know, her adult life in various orchestras and things. And I'd done demos with Ewan Morgan, who'd worked with Griff Rhys and Kate LeBon, and I made some demos with him that didn't turn out so well. And I made some recordings in India with the Juan McLean, who's on DFA and used to be in a band on Sub Pop, and he's a very nice guy whose game was into the Ashtanga. And I knew his manager very well, who manages Bedouin and Jose Gonzalez and some of these people, and he connected us, and I did some recording with him, and I recorded at David Tibet's house from Current 93, and his then wife, and David Tibet came up with the name. He said, "You are the Dawn Song, Nick." You know, and he knew I was his yoga teacher for a long time, David Tibet. So, well, not a long time, but on and off, you know.
Yes.
And I've always really loved and respected David and his ex-wife, Andrea. So I recorded some first demos there. And of course, at this point, I was 40, God knows what. And it was so ridiculous. And if I did mention it to anyone, they go, oh, no, you know, shut up, mate, you know. So for me, that was sort of really coming full circle and doing what needed to be done. And Morgan really, really loved it. And my old friend Matthew from Tangle Parrot in Swansea had started a record label, and he put a single out by Dat Bluggy, who's a great Welsh kind of post-punk electronic guy. Died recently, but Matthew had put a 7-inch out by him, and Matthew was sort of friends with the kind of West Wales Tafia, you know, the Hugh Stevens, and you know, some of these people that I think Griff Rees would go into his shop. And so Matthew was like, well, you know, he'd been listening to my music, and he said, you know, I'll do it if no one else wants to do it, you know. But I sent it to Lawrence, I sent it to Mark Cates from Geffen, I sent it to Penny. Penny was listening to it for 2 years. Every single demo, every detail, and writing long. Tav, who was then one of the world's biggest, most successful managers, writing back, yes, Nick, Lawrence, who else? All of them. None of them blanked me. Every single one who by rights should have said, what are you doing? You know, go and teach some yoga. Every single one of them said, no, we remember how much you love music and how great your label was, some of them. And the guys from Crane, the guy from Bivouac, Paul Yeadon, he mastered it free of charge out of the love of his heart. He's a mastering engineer now. He's done some good records. So all these people, Aldous Harding, who's my favorite new artist from the last 10 years, really, she wrote to me and said, oh, your song's really great. All these people who were writing back and saying, it's beautiful, well done, it's wonderful. Tav writing back and saying, well, the good news is the songs are great. The bad news is the production's terrible. You know, so there were just all these people. And Fish from Icons of Filth, who also recorded a demo with me, writing back and saying, oh, I love it, Nick, it's amazing. I felt this huge sense of completion and sort of like I could finally exhale.
Yes.
I made my record, and it wasn't a generic 7-inch, it wasn't a Slaughter Tradition tape, it wasn't singing songs on a Chumbawamba side project, it wasn't touring with the Sperm Birds and generic squats in you know, it was me and my sort of heart ripped open, singing love songs to my son, who taught me the meaning of love, really. You know, I mean, not that my wife didn't play a big part in that, but you know, when you have a kid, it's another kind of love.
Yes,
filial love or agape or one of these other. You know, I was very familiar with eros, but you know, that filial love and agape, you know, it took that child to teach me to love someone else more than I loved myself, or crass,
or conflict. But
or,
so
not conflict. Sorry, Colin.
Call them conflict.
But Flux, yes, and the Mob, yes, and Poison Girls, yes. Rudimentary P9, yes.
It was Discharge. Sorry, I'm getting Discharge.
Discharge also, you know.
Yeah. But look, so how long did it take to recover from all that treatment? Was it a year or two?
No, I was having 5 years of checkups before I was in remission. And that was when I made some money, because I got out of the Geffen deal, and I explained to Derek, I can't. That guy isn't there anymore. And I can't go back to it. And so I managed to get out of that deal.
Yes.
With Derek's blessings and a lot of tears. And I shut down Elemental Records.
Did you? Can you remember the day when it was kind of all over?
Yeah, I remember crying and Derek saying, oh, for fuck's sake, Nick, don't cry. And I remember thinking, but I can, and that's the best thing about me. It's the only thing about me that I really respect, and it's the only thing about me that gave me the right to run Elemental Records in the first place.
Yes.
And Derek sort of, wished me well. And I took the money and I sort of edged my way out of my relationship, not very nicely. And I went to India because I'd done some Ashtanga, and the Ashtanga had the discharge thing. It was there, it was very strong, very powerful, very meaningful. And it connected me back to the creative subcurrent, or the orgone, as you called it, or the prana, which is where creativity comes from. So ultimately, we can tell the difference between Morrissey in the Smiths and Morrissey not in the Smiths.
Yes.
I mean, it's so patently fucking obvious, it doesn't take an NME writer to figure that out. We all figured it out, it was just not good enough. And it didn't feel substantial creatively. And so, for me, what I became very interested in is, what is it that makes some things magical, beautiful and timeless, and other things disposable, forgettable and meaningless?
Yes, I mean, actually, that's a really good point, because I've wondered that myself so much. What Ace of Spades, Motorhead, amazing. Dancing Queen by ABBA, amazing. Changes by David Bowie, amazing. Just like yeah, it's that.
I heard it in your voice every single interview you did. It's still bursting out of your chest.
It's that kind of. What is it that, that's something, isn't it?
It's God, dude. I mean, I'm sorry. I'm not a Christian. I'm not born again. I'm not a religious person. But when you're in deep yoga, when you're in deep meditation, it's there. And it's in your heart. It doesn't live in a church or a temple. It lives in your heart. And when people are deeply connected to their own hearts, they sing. Because it's the only way you can deal with the pain of the horrors that the nobility and the wealthy and the landed gentry have wrought upon this planet. They have done humanity a disservice. They are greedy, they are evil, and they are ruthless, and they are desperate, and they are frightened, and they need to be told. And that's why Discharge, that's why Dancing Queen, that's why Changes, that's why A Hard Rain is going to fall. That's why Babylon must fall. Babylon must fall. It's not optional. And it's only going to fall when the people connect to their hearts. And I know I sound very dramatic and but yoga and cancer and Crass and Neil Young, when he sang Helpless, when he sang Look at Mother Nature on the Run in the 1970s, it's because we are suffering, because it's not okay. Boris Johnson's not okay. And it's easier to make a joke about it now, or to, have a joke about Alan McGee, or, keep it small. But these songs are not small. Creativity isn't small. Our hearts are not small. Morrissey, before he was a racist pig, he wasn't a small person. He was a brave man with a heart of gold. When Joni Mitchell sang Blue, I mean, this was just pure love, and it was dignified. When Johnny Rotten, when Joe Strummer said it, they meant it. You can't fake it. No matter how many trilby hats you try on, it's got to be real.
Yes.
So all I had to do was to at least make a record that was real, and to sing from my heart and to sing from the deepest love that I knew, which was, I'm going to sing to my son, and I'm not going to put any lyrical devices. It's not going to be knowing, it's not going to be clever, and it's not going to be arch. And those that know will recognize, and those that don't will make a joke about me being a big puff or whatever, just like they did at school. The thugs always beat up the artists.
Yes, this is true. God, my God. So just on that creative process, when you got the album out, did it feel like a release, or did you think, God, I've got to do this again, I've got to sing another album to Morgan?
No, I'm satisfied with that one. I'd like to do another one, but the songs have to be there and they have to be good enough. I like those songs. I'm proud of those songs, and they're real and they serve a purpose, and they needed to come out. It's a sort of cleansing kind of thing. I don't have to do another one, but I play a lot, I write a lot, I sing a lot. Morgan and Katya still enjoy my music, and the oboe player still plays with me, and I still play with the guitarist every couple of weeks. And the guy who played the bass on the record, he's in a Cream covers band with Ginger Baker's son.
Right.
And the guitarist was in a Genesis and Phil Collins. There's a lot of very technically proficient musicians in the Netherlands. They're very good at copying people. They're some of the best cover bands you'll ever see in the Netherlands, but not that many, maybe apart from Pit Bloom or the X, not that many great Dutch. I'm sure Golden Earring would disagree, but not many great Dutch bands, although I love De Kift. They were a Dutch sort of post-punk band who were really good, but and the drummer was from a death metal band called Luciferian. And like I say, the oboe player was, playing in an orchestra. But she loved them. She says, oh, it reminds me of English folk music. It sounds very medieval. And it sounds... and then, like I say, I started getting all this feedback from people whose opinions... Lawrence said he thought it was a timeless classic, all these amazing things from people. I mean, I could send you them. It was quite a shock. And I never told anybody. I never shared any of the quotes or anything. I kept it all private because they were all old friends of mine. This is the first person I'm telling. But by the time I sent one of the little videos to Aldous Harding via my Instagram, and she wrote back just saying, it's really good. Your song's really good. And I had pages and pages of all this Aldous Harding stuff, and I worship Aldous Harding, I have all the sort of, as much as I do Gorky Zygotic Monkey or, some of these, I really like Euros Child.
Yes.
So I was very touched by him and some of his Let Those Blue Skies. He was another one who's very, or Jonesy from Sigur Rós, or these people are just so sensitive. I don't know. I feel satisfied, and I don't have to, Matthew manufactured 100 vinyl and 100 CDs, and we numbered them all.
Excellent.
And it was enough that Matthew and some of these old friends said, it's beautiful. And it was enough to get that. I still don't know. And a few strangers too.
Because I saw it's been streamed a lot on Spotify, hasn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I paid for some playlists and things, I tried to get it out there. And
right.
I talked to Tav a lot, who's very successful now. He's got Alt J and Wolf Alice and, everything he touches. He used to manage Ash. And he did all the plugging for Carter, the Unstoppable Sex Machine, and the KLF. He worked at Rough Trade. He's been around a long time. He managed one of my bands, AC Acoustics, who I liked a lot, who I had a little bit of success with early on with Elemental. And he said, well, you're too old, and but it's really good. So what you can do is there's a way of sort of doing it without losing loads of money, paying publicists and radio pluggers, and you can start to, and there's been a lot of bands who've been very successful getting their music straight to Spotify. And I was like, I don't even use Spotify, dude. You know, what about SoundCloud? He went, shut up, Nick. As you can see, I'm talkative. But, you know, he said there's a way of doing it. And part of that was getting playlists and, you know, kind of promoting songs. And
right.
So I did a little bit of that, which got it out there. But, you know, you don't know who's listening to them. You're not really. But I did a bit of Instagramming and I got a little Facebook page, but it was in the middle of all the pandemic. So either I sat on it, tried to put the band together and play some gigs, or I said, well, it's a gift for my son, honouring my life in music, giving myself the feeling at least that I'd been true to myself, you know, and my calling, even if nobody gives a crap, and lots of people didn't, you know. A few people I sent it to Ted Kessler, who I'd always admired, and he was like, not my kind of music. But it got a few plays on BBC Radio Wales folk shows, and it got about 15 or 20 glowing reviews from Welsh things, you know. It was all Wales because I released it on this little Welsh label. But it's sort of enough. But if another one might come along, if the songs are good enough, if I feel like there's enough music, you know, all it takes is a Spotify premium account, and you can see there's just so much music. We're drowning in it now, really. It's quite, what we need now is curators.
We need curators. I know we sort of the gatekeepers, as I used to sometimes talk about.
You're a curator now. You've done a good job. You know, it's nice. No, I'm not joking. It's very nice what you've done. It's respectful, and it's you, but it's also them. It's like painting a picture. I remember saying to Lawrence once, you know, when I started making these, he sort of wrote to me and he said, oh, it sounds like, you know, Syd Barrett. It sounds like, you know, a genuinely eccentric English folk record that will be. And I was like, oh, Lawrence, because now, of course, now he's a big cheese now. And I said to him, don't you ever, you know, you were in Perfect Days back in the day, you know, you were at all the early Senseless Things gigs, you were in a band, you're a singer. Don't you ever want to make a record to honour that creative part? Because he's another sort of sensitive, kind guy, you know, who's not really a tough music business mogul. And he said, well, you know, I'm painting a picture with Domino. You know, I choose carefully the artist and I paint the picture. You know, I can't put my friends' records out, Nick. Sorry, it would be too, you know, sort of disrespectful to the other ones who I haven't. You know, you're a very dear old friend, so I respected that. I was a little bit sad, you know, because Domino turned into such a. It didn't turn. It's always been a great label, actually, but
yes.
So, but I thought what he said about. That was something I never quite got to that level with Elemental. You know, it was beginning, but the illness really knocked me onto a different track, you know. Anyway, blah, blah, blah. I'm sure you've had enough of me. I think
it sort of from sort of various stories, but, you know, like Alan McGee sort of got that oasis, that 90s period. And then, you know, eventually the wheels come off, don't they?
It really did. But he put out so many, I mean, Bandwagon-esque and Loveless, and the Swerve Driver records, never mind the other stuff, but those three, I would say that for me were, during my particularly Swerve Driver, who I never thought got their just desserts, you know. I loved Swerve Driver. I thought, again, they had a sensitivity, and they had what My Bloody Valentine and Teenage Fan Club have, but also with sort of layers of such sort of clever guitar melodies, saturated, you know, in melody. I was drowning in their melodies. I went to see them in Cardiff about 8 years ago or something, and there were about 6 people there, and I was just like, oh, fuck the music business. fuck this, Swerve Driver. I will sing their praises, and so it's a cruel business in a way, because I think there are so many unsung genie animals that swim, AC Acoustic, some of the bands on my label, I'll never understand really why they never got their
moment. But I guess I remember talking to Joe Boyd about Nick Drake, and it was a bit the frustration of that.
I love Nick Drake. Love Nick Drake's the other one.
They kind of like, God, this just isn't. I'm sorry, Nick. Right. This isn't going to quite work. We're not going to sell more than 50 copies. I'm afraid.
Stop it! Don't even say. I don't even want to know. But it's funny. Then John Martin went on to sort of. I don't know.
But when you listen to Solid Air on a winter's day, that record just gets me.
It's very beautiful, yeah.
Oh, there is some Danny Thompson's bass. It's that kind of like Joni Mitchell. You've got Blue in the winter. You got Hiss in the Summer, Lawns in the summer. Horton Spark kind of springtime. That kind of record too. Car on the Hill. People's parties. It's just like that.
Very, very powerful. Very deep.
The music is just like
Yeah.
And some of those lyrics on Blue, I don't know, those conversations that she can put into a song, which are just like, last time I saw Richard was just
yeah. I could drink a case of you.
Oh, and just
still be on my feet.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's I mean, my father's favorite artist was Leonard Cohen, and so I grew up, there was a lot of Leonard Cohen, but I could see my dad, he didn't just like Leonard Cohen. He was devoted to Leonard Cohen. He was in love with Leonard Cohen. He didn't just like Georges Brassens. He worshipped Georges Brassens. He didn't just like Tom Paxton. He was completely smitten. So I think falling in love and music have a very, very close. That's why it was such a big business, still is in some respects. It's because it's nothing. I remember being at Dial House talking to Penny and G, and me sort of banging on about my record, and Penny indulging me and listening and being willing to engage, and very, very, very sweet and very innocent and very kind Penny. He can be very ruthless and creatively sort of tough. But he's a Tinkerbell. He has a little Tinkerbell tattooed on his shoulder, actually. He has a real sort of light touch and a very, very sort of gentle, creative quality to a certain aspect of his character. And I remember discussing, and G kind of going, oh, God, music is just relentless. Because, of course, she's a visual artist and one of the most visual artists, one of the most talented visual artists of my lifetime, and finally getting the recognition she deserves in some of the most prestigious museums in Europe. But she's still sort of drowning in other people's obsession with music. And, Penny said, well, Nick, I think this is a worthwhile project. You should continue this. But he also said sometimes I'd send him mixes and stuff. Oh, it's awful, do this, do that, change this, change that. But, we were acknowledging that music is moving. So it's moving when you listen to it. And the human that receives it is moving too, through their life, through their emotional inner landscapes, through their emotional / spiritual territory. It's why all the big politicians want to use Keep on Rocking in the Free World so badly, because they know, or why Tony Blair, used that Dee Ream song.
Things can only get better.
Only better, because he knew nothing else was going to galvanize emotional sentiment to the same extent. I mean, God bless Picasso, God bless Van Gogh. But, music is a whole another level of artistry, to my mind, that goes so fucking deep. When I heard The Barrel by Aldous Harding, so begins the braiding, and in that braid you'll stay. I mean, it's like, we might as well die now. It's all said,
Yes.
So to me, I found it's not Joni Mitchell, it's not Neil Young, it's not Steve Ignorant, it's not Echo Belly. I don't feel it's the creative spirit. They all know.
Yes.
Prince Michael Jackson used to say, if I don't write it down now, Prince will get it. It's in the ethers.
Right. My God. There you go.
It dances in our hearts, and all we can do is say thank you, and you only need one spiritual mantra really. And that's thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you for the sunshine. Thank you for my heartbeat, this one and this one and this one and this one. Thank you for the apple. Thank you for the water. Thank you for the music. Thank you for the rivers. Thank you for the good times. Thank you for the bad times. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You don't need to be religious or spiritual as long as you remember to say thank you when you wake up. Because the minute you stop saying thank you, the next album's going to be shit.
God, that's amazing, isn't it?
It's the truth.
It's the truth. Yes. Well, absolutely. I mean, just briefly on your sort of your last 20. Did you? I mean, because a lot of people I know, because I went through quite a hippie thing in the sort of 80s and 90s. Did you get into things like the 5 rhythms and dance as well, or was it?
I got really, really into yoga. I did yoga every single day. I never skipped a day. I became a very sort of, I suppose, what you'd call physically a very advanced practitioner.
Mm-hmm.
And I started teaching all over the world. I taught in the States a few times. Me and my wife, we taught in Finland, in Denmark, in Portugal, in Bali, in Thailand, in Denmark, in Britain, in all over really. And I found what I was looking for, the same thing I found in Discharge and in that club underneath heaven, Deja Vu, on my first pill, and the feelings I got with dub no bass with my head man, and all the great music I ever heard, I found it. So I didn't need to go anywhere else. Like when you fall in love, I don't want another wife. I don't need another kid. I got my kid. He's my guy. I don't need to flit around. I'd done a lot of flitting around, and what I wanted to do was to be, deeply faithful to one style of yoga, which is considered to be a very, very ancient, authentic style of yoga. I spent years and years and years studying with the same guru in India, with his family, with the daughter and the grandson. I still call them my teachers, and I'm very loyal, so I don't flit around really, because I did that in my music life, a lot of flitting around. But my spiritual life was really about, it's like if you're given a mantra, you don't sort of swap and change. The power of the mantra is, for example, for the Buddhists, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum. You don't sort of change after 4 repetitions. Go, I'm going to go and do a bit of 5 elements now. It's about how deep.
Yeah.
And it's the same with music. It's the same with yoga. You dig deep until you hit the water or the gold. You keep going. You have faith, and the faith has to be real. He said, you can't be sort of faith if, it's David Bowie singing it. It's got to be total. You've got to be 100% committed. It's not 99.9% committed. It's got to be total, and it's got to be real, and that's difficult in this day and age, because we all have supermarket personalities that go, well, I'll try McVitie's Hobnobs, but no, now I fancy a Garibaldi. Nobody's deep enough for it to be that meaningful. So in my case, it's Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya. I fell in love with this destructive principle because I saw the way that life was just constantly destroying everything that went before. next. So what the Hindu sort of pantheon or there's a million gods in India. Everything's a god in India. They've got a monkey and an elephant and a this and a that, and female gods that do this and male gods that do that. You've got Vishnu, who's the preserver that walks through time and space in great strides. You've got Lakshmi, who's abundance and wealth and health. You've got Saraswati, who's creativity. You have Ganesh, who is the lord of obstacles, that removes and puts obstacles in your way. So you learn to treat all of these emblems or these archetypes as therapists, and you go to them as a Welsh idiot who likes icons of filth, and you say, I'm scared, I'm disappointed, I'm afraid, I'm depressed, I'm broke, I'm sad, I'm frightened. And you have a kind of dialogue using mantras with these archetypal aspects of the human condition that have been around a lot longer than me and you have, or any individual human. And then you get into a kind of relationship with this spectral characterization of certain divine qualities within yourself. So the interesting thing about yoga and Indian philosophy, Vedanta, is that the Atman, which is the eternal aspect of the human and the creation at large, is inside you. So it's not, God in the clouds going, "You're a bad man, Nick Evans," and I go, "I'm sorry, I know." It's your own heart is God. That's what God is. And, I never heard that in my religious education class. That's something I had to go to India to find that. And that mirrored perfectly my experience in the midst of the cancer. Who's beating my heart? Where does that energy come from? Well, it's the same energy that said, why, but why?
Yes.
Or wrote, last time I saw Richard, or look at Mother Nature on the run.
Yes.
It's the same thing. And no true artist is stupid enough to think it's them that did it. They all know. It's the biggest secret of all. None of them will say, "Oh, I'm religious," or anything. You listen to a few Noel Gallagher interviews about songwriting, or Prince for that matter, or any of them. They all say the same thing. So I think I owed it to myself, to keep going until I got to the source of the fountain. Don't give up till you get there. And it's easy to do that in India. It's where, of course, lots of people have gone to India to do that. Obviously George Harrison and the Beatles were the big ones. But it was always okay for me because I loved Sgt. Pepper's and I loved George Harrison. I liked his sensitivity and his guitar playing very much.
Did you over Christmas subscribe to Disney Channel and watch the 8 hours?
I did. I subscribed, but mainly for the Mandalorian for Morgan. But when that came along, I found it very touching, very powerful, very beautiful.
Yes. Amazing.
I love to see their friendship. I love to see the role that each one of them played in the creative process. I love to see who John Lennon actually was. I thought that was very interesting, who Paul McCartney was and how, in effect, Ringo facilitated them all being there. I thought it was incredible how sort of comfortable Ringo was being silent and sort of how good he was at stopping the bus from going off the edge of the cliff. he kept kind of, because they all had pretty big egos. They were all dealing with, I mean, they were all lovely guys by the looks of it. I don't know for sure, but from that, they all seemed like very, very sort of fun, very light, very creative, very kind guys. And I really felt, in a way, George was in some respects the most difficult because he wasn't getting the kind of recognition from the others that he felt like he deserved, and he adopted this spiritual persona. McCartney was obviously the Ubermensch who was sort of conducting the whole thing, or certainly 80% of it. But it was interesting to me that Paul couldn't really find a complete sense of validation unless finally Lennon turned around and went, "All right, Paul.
Yes.
That one's pretty good." It's like nothing was good. He couldn't do that for himself. He needed John.
It was a beautiful relationship between the two of them.
Amazing, and what a thing. Peter Jackson did such a great job of giving it a kind of narrative arc and a sense of pathos and this extraordinary kind of drama. It was just brilliant. I've still got it swishing around inside my psychic body.
Well, I think what was amazing was that I expected it, because I thought, oh, is it going to get boring? But I was more gripped and kept, going back and watching another bit. And then sort of thinking, oh, God, it's going to get really depressing at the end. But actually, they were just getting going at the end. And that was like, oh, my God, I can't believe. It wasn't like, watching the Titanic. This was like, but all you now need to do is book a venue like the Royal Albert Hall for a month and just play for a month. You just want to rock, because they had some stupid ideas about going on ships and stuff. But they just kind of were like, we just want to rock as a band. We just want to go out there.
But I thought the most amazing thing for me was this idea of, for the benefit of Mr. Kite, we are not the Beatles anymore. We are, Billy Spears, and it was like this alternate, like, we're not just going to be one band. Now we're going to be thousands of bands, we're going to be a different band every record. You can't even recognize us now because we're in disguise, and they were just light years. And in fact, a friend of mine who I worked with at One Little Indian, who did me the honor of writing back and talking to me about the music business in the 2020s and all that, is Scott Rogers. And Scott Rogers used to be managing Björk with Derek, but now manages Paul McCartney. He managed the Arcade Fire for a while, but now he's been Paul McCartney's manager for a long time now.
Right.
And he's another very sort of genuine, sensitive guy, who again, took the time to respond to an old, sad work colleague who'd made a record. And yes, I listened to it. Yes, Nick, it's going to be difficult, to be honest, but long response to my, did you listen?
Yes.
Scott bloody Rogers, is now probably the biggest manager in the world. So there are friendships from the music business. And I think if that Beatles film said anything, it's that, again, love or friendship is the beating heart of creativity. And, to my mind, the fact that Mark Cates posted a big thing on, this is the guy that worked with Sonic Youth, Nirvana, Elastica, Beck, Geffen. He was their A&R man for a long time, and he posted my record on his Facebook page and his Twitter saying, this man changed my understanding of music. He's made an extraordinarily beautiful record. Brian Long, who is also A&R at Geffen, but also signed the Chemical Brothers at Astral Works and manages Jose Gonzalez and Bedouin and the Juan McLean and a bunch of other people, all of them, Tav, Lawrence, they all kind of were so excited to engage with me about this ridiculous thing I was doing. And to me, that's says that in the end, musicians are collaborative. They make their best work when they're collaborating with their friends. Friendship is a key element to the magic. Love is a key element. Deep sentiment. When you're able to connect with a part of yourself that feels so strongly about your love for this man or this woman or this friend that you're jamming with. And I know that when I play with Matthias, and I just go there really easily, and we play for every 2 weeks. This is the guitarist on my record. And we play and we don't talk very much. I just unzip, we talk for a couple of minutes, and then we just jam for an hour and a half, and then I leave. And the same with Anemone, who I make music with, and all the musicians really. Danny, that I used to make music with in Asturias in the north of Spain, who's in a great band called Losone, who's singing French in Asturiano. And one of my favorite new bands is a band called Sangre de Muerdago, who are living in Germany, but are in fact singing ancient Celtic Galician hymns and playing on ancient instruments like zithers and all these amazing weird instruments. And me and Catty go and see them quite a lot. And they're all old Crass fans and Amebix fans. And they're extraordinary. If you ever have a chance to listen to Juntas with an X by Sangre de Muerdago, if that doesn't, I'm not sure it's going to be your thing. It's very, very traditional Galician folk music, but it's extraordinary. There's a lot of people making very sort of alien Nordic folk music now that's closely connected to the dark folk metal scene. And I go to Roadburn quite a lot, which is just down the road. And I went to see David Tibet and Youth headline. I went to see Godspeed You Black Emperor headline. I went to see Neurosis headline, and I booked their first European tour. I had a lovely lunch with the guy from Amebix, who was in a band called Tau Cross, who you've interviewed, and subsequently has been accused of being an awful anti-Semite. But
he's the sword maker, isn't he?
He's the sword maker, but he's a very, very, very sweet guy. So I was very shocked when suddenly he was being called all these names, because he's just lovely. But Roadburn is a scene. People travel from all over the world. I saw some fantastic things at Roadburn, and like I say, it wasn't just David Tibet and Youth. It was Dysphere, who are, a Discharge kind of D-beat band. It was Sangre de Muerdago playing dark apocalyptic folk. It was Earthless from San Diego playing kind of doing an improvisational 3-hour set with Demos Suzuki from Cannes. It's the most extraordinary festival in the world now. For people who are interested in talking of the Bisto kids, Roadburn, I guarantee, from anyone, even Richard, what's his name? Richard Hawkin, who just made the album with Circle. What's his name? Richard, he's on Domino.
Oh.
He's fucking amazing. He's from Northumbria. Where's he from? He's from Sunderland or Newcastle, and his last few albums are the best.
Oh, yes.
Richard, what's his name? Richard, I'm sure he's in my library somewhere.
He's got, oh, God, yes. But he was one of those Sheffield bands, wasn't he?
Yeah. He's really cool, and he played at Roadburn, but I got to find out his name. We have to, dude. We have to.
Yeah, that would be.
I was gonna run a list of all the people I'm listening to now, because I still make playlists and things on Spotify. And
do you know what?
I do. I have one that I put out when the record came out called Dawn Songs for the Dusk. And I have another one called The Philosopher's Window, which changes a little bit. It's older music, and cherry-picked, but I have one called New Monsters and Friendly Ghosts, which is all my current listening. So it's not stuff I necessarily like, but now I sift, like I used to sift through the box of demos in the Elemental. So now I just sift every good review by every writer I love, every playlist by everybody whose opinion I care about, all my friends' tastes, and I just feed them through New Monsters and Friendly Ghosts, and then delete ruthlessly as I discover they're not as good as Kate Le Bon or I don't know, Sangre de Muerdago or who else, but they're all decent. And let me see, Spotify, my library. I like Six Organs of Admittance. I love the last Waxahachie record. I love The War on Drugs. I liked Fleet Foxes for like 30 seconds. I love Midlake, you know Midlake?
Yes.
I like Midlake. I like Fortet. I love John Reese's new records, Plosives. That's really, really good. His solo record's great. I love Big Thief. They're fantastic. They deserve everything they get. I like, let me see if I can say a couple of others that I like the new Tom York, The Smile. That's a good record. I don't know if
you've got three, you've got 6 playlists. So which is the one that you've got some of these very obscure bands that I not have a clue how you spell?
Well, New Monsters and Friendly Ghosts is my current listening, and it's changing all the time. It's got Hovdi, who I like a lot. So if you want to listen to what I'm listening to in the car, Hovdi. New Monsters and Friendly Ghosts. That's sort of my most up-to-date playlist. But the ones that have some of my favorite songs of all time, where I'm that's The Philosopher's Window.
Fantastic.
And it's also Dawn Songs for the Dusk. They're both quite long, but you might enjoy them. They've got astronaut songs and AC Temple and, Beth Orton or, all sorts of people from all different, but they're not too obvious, but they're very listenable. I love Sonic Youth. They're one of the greatest live bands I ever saw. But I'm not into Discordia for the sake of Discordia. I love melody. I love pretty melodies, but I love pretty melodies and then sort of fucking them up, but not to the extent that it sacrifices the purity of the melody.
Yes, this is true.
I hope I haven't just gone on and on.
No, that's been fine.
And on.
So this might be tricky to answer, but if you could have said something to your 16-year-old self starting out, and you thought, God, yeah, if someone could have just whispered something in my ears, I just went off on this incredible journey. Is there anything that in particular that you might have thought, yeah, that would have been quite good?
I would have loved it if Punishment of Luxury had been as big as Devo. No, sorry. I would have said, never give up the dream. Never betray yourself. Never give up the dream. Don't live for other people, Always stay true to your dream. It's because you won't be able to live with yourself otherwise.
Yes.
So it's that kind of thing, which I've heard other people say. But, life will try and get you to give up your dream, to stop looking for the smell of the Bisto,
The Bisto, I like the Bisto, actually.
Yeah.
Is there one book that you often turn to or had a massive influence on your life?
Yeah, there is. There is. God, it's a very difficult, I have to say, it's this, really. But, then I'm getting, I loved my Magpie Eyes Are Hungry for the Prize, the Alan McGee biography. I thought that was a really great read. And I love Ted Kessler's book that he just published, But this, where is it? Talks with Ramana Maharshi.
Right.
Of all of the spiritual stuff, that really does take you. Look, you can even see what it says. If you can read that backwards.
Talks is all pure gold. It's from the heart.
It's he's one of India's greatest ever sages or spiritual teachers, and he lived in a mountain in the south of India called Arunachala, and people from all over the world went there to visit him. He died a long time ago. I never met him, but I've been there. And of all the sort of spiritual teachers, he's the one that I've been sort of carrying close. I never grew out of it. It never stopped, it never seemed anything less than coming from a place of pure love, pure love and kindness and empathy, compassion for the human condition, the frailty of the human condition. So it's a very interesting, it's one of those books you can pick up for 30 years and it will never let you down, So anyway, and my wife also is very fond of Cathy's really, and so we share that in common. We're not weird cult people. It's all within the framework, but also just back to it's always been more about music for me, really. When I'm sort of lost and sad, if I go back to music, so music's the only thing that really does the trick.
Yes, this is true. It is.
It's the only thing. It's the only thing that it takes the pain away. As Peaches said, fucks the pain away.
Like
Peaches, the teachers of Peaches. She's cool, Peaches.
Yes. My God, this is amazing. Look, this has been.
I'm sort of reluctant to keep going. I like Joe. I'm listening to Joan Shelley. I like the new Michael Head. Michael Head from Shack.
Yes,
that's a good record. Dear Scott. He's got some really nice songs on there. That's strong. Couple more before I go. See if I can plug a couple of other great. I was sad to see Mark Lanegan go.
Yes,
I wasn't the hugest fan of Mark Lanegan, but I like Sweet Oblivion by the Screaming Trees. That's one of my favorite grunge records. That's never really died for me. I really love to listen to Fortet. I never get tired of Fortet. Fortet's always pushing, the remnants of acid house forward into new shapes. I was very sad when Fortet and Lawrence fell out. I thought, they're both fabulous people, and it was a real shame to see them sort of dissolve. I always listen to Ben Chasney and Six Organs of Admittance. I always listen to David Tibet and Current 93 for the lyrics. Yes. He's never disappointed me lyrically. I really love the fact that the war on drugs took sort of widespread, pompous, hideous, Springsteen-esque rock and filtered it through Noi and turned it into the most fantastic hip music, modern stadium rock. I love Rosie Plain. Do you know Rosie Plain from Bristol?
No.
Fucking extraordinary. Katya, my wife's favourite band ever is Low. She never stops listening to Low. And so I love Low because of her. I love Nathan Salzberg, who just did a fantastic album of amazing sort of Judaic guitar pieces. He's an incredible guitarist. I still look at John Mulvey's recommendations in the Mojo playlist. That's a very strong. I think Whipped by Bonnie Prince Billy is one of my favourite alt country songs ever written. Still touches my heart. Dig out Whipped by Bonnie Prince Billy. And what will I finish with?
Did you like that album? I think it was him. I Can See a Darkness?
Oh, fucking amazing. And Ease On Down the Road and Master and Everyone. That is regal, Bonnie Prince Billy. That's when he was one of the greats. And in my opinion, since then, it's never really... I like listening to the new Guided by Voices records when they come along. I don't love them, but he's in his 50s. He still makes a record every year.
Who's that?
Robert Pollard, Guided by Voices.
Oh, yes.
Brilliant. I'll always listen to Amen Dunes. Do you know Amen Dunes?
No.
They're on Sacred Bones Records. He's a fucking genius. And Freedom by Amen Dunes and Designer by Aldous Harding are probably my two favorite records of the last 10 years, with a few others following close up behind. But, you know, I could go on all night.
Well, I'll check out your playlist.
Yeah, I will. I love Arooj Aftab, who's the Indian singer that won Grammys recently, and very, very beautiful, very beautiful. She's in there. You'll find her in one of my playlists. So there's a song called Mohabbat, which is where all my love of India and yoga and all my love of contemporary cutting edge music kind of blend perfectly. But,
yes.
yeah, I will touch the feet of Amen Dunes and Aldous Harding until something better comes along.
This is great. So New Monsters and Friendly Ghosts. This is the one.
Yeah, but like I say, that's changing constantly. So I'm not saying it's good. I'm saying that's what I'm listening to find stuff that's good. That's one level of the filtration system. If you want another level of the filtration system, is the Philosopher's Window.
Right.
And because those are actually songs that I'm, you know, devoted to. And before that, when I was trying to explain to people what my record was, I did Dawn Songs for the Dusk. And Dawn Song was my name. I was christened Dawn Song by David Tibet. And so if I make another record, it'll be Dawn Song. And I'm hoping, in the way that Badly Drawn Boy is referred to as Badly Drawn Boy, that one day, if anyone ever gives a shit about my record, they'll say, oh, I know that Dawn Song guy.
Yes, that's God, that's a great collection on Dawn Songs for the Dusk.
Yeah, love you, dude. Great to talk to you.
I mean, Bob Mould, Sunspots.
Yeah, that's a classic record. That's a classic. Workbook is where I really, you know, united spiritually with Bob Mould. I love everything he's done, mostly, but that record changed me.
Yeah, there's an acoustic guitar instrumental track on there.
Sunspots.
Yeah, okay.
It's extraordinary.
And in this lonely room, Jesus.
It's heart-wrenching.
It is hard.
I mean, I love Grant Hart too. I love that first Grant Hart solo record's beautiful too.
Yes, but I noticed that the bass player's just had prostate cancer, and
he's just released a new record.
Has he?
He's got a super group. He's got a very punk, called Greg Norton, you mean?
Greg, yeah, that's the one.
I didn't know he had prostate cancer, though. That's sad.
So he's just either had the operation or he's having treatment. So,
well, that's sad.
But he looks good. He's still got his
mustachio. Yeah. Let's send him some blessings and love.
We're going to send him lots of love, because he's just a beautiful man.
Well, people get through it, and I'm living proof. So,
yes. And
my life force is strong. You know, so I don't regret a moment.
Yes, well, I'll have to. Yes. Well, look, this has been amazing. Do keep in touch.
Yeah, I'd like to. You're very sweet, and that's why I wanted to do it. You know, I turned down all the yoga people that say, "Will you do an interview?" I always say no, because I don't want to. You know, the Tao that can be spoken is not the ancient Tao. You know, so if I'm going to speak, I will speak to someone who loves music from the very, very, very pits of their being, which it's clear to me that you do. You know, it's very touching. So,
but luckily, I got that guy, the Daft Bluggy guy. I think I managed to get an interview with him.
Oh, well done. Well done.
And so, because I remember him on the John Peel show during the 80s. John was just playing all those Welsh bands.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
Daft Bluggy.
Wrth y Fidliad, y Rynreffen. I know them all.
I know.
Rhys Mewn from Randreffen still is a great inspiration to me. You know, and they had Andreffen records, and I think the Welsh scene that we all know now from Gorkies and Super Furries and that whole thing, it all came from Rhys, really. Rhys is the seed that made Welsh people feel proud of their language and proud of their culture and proud of their creativity and not ashamed to be Welsh anymore. It wasn't the Manics, it wasn't Catatonia, it was Rhys.
Yeah, no, that was a great period. I remember recording John Peel's show, and it had Daft Bluggy. He was playing Ivor Cutler, the Bundu Boys, you know, the early hip hop. It was just, you know, he curated those shows.
Godflesh in the middle of it all.
You
just feel like, what's happening now, John?
The only time I met John,
him too. I met him. He was lovely. He gave Truman's Water. He gave all my band sessions. In fact, last story. Can I tell the last story? I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I'm excited. I won't get to tell these stories again, but I started Elemental Records. I moved down from Leeds to London, and I was in bed in Ferndale Road. We were sharing a flat with Julie Dalkin from Dan, who was just an amazing woman, and I was listening to John Peel, and I was waiting for John Peel to start, and I just released my first record, which was the Big C EP by Crane from Ashington in Northumberland, and it was the first song he played, the Colourblind, and he said it was the first song he played, and he gave it an absolutely glowing review, and it was the opening song, which was always a big thing, you know, and it was one of the proudest moments of my life, and I lay in bed kind of weeping, you know, because it was a dream come true. And after that, he must have given, I would say 70% of the bands I work with got a Peel session, and I met him at a Truman's Water gig in wherever the hell it was. I can't remember, Norwich. I can't remember where it was, but one of these things. And I said, "Oh, do you like Drive Like Jehu?" And he said, "They're all right, but Truman's Water are fucking amazing." and you know, he said they were his favourite band. You know, so
amazing.
I don't know, but
it's still nice.
Very grateful.
I only met him once. That was at Ipswich in the Caribbean Centre, and there was.
Who was playing? Extreme Noise Terror.
Napalm Death and Extreme Noise Terror, yeah.
Oh, wow. Was he sweet with you?
Well, it was so loud that, you know.
Okay. He was very sweet to me. He's a polite guy, you know. He didn't seem to want to... And he rang me a lot because a lot of the bands I was booking tours for, and John Walters, when I was in Leeds in my squat, I get phone calls from them fairly regularly. We had Peel sessions with Fire Party, with maybe the Nation of Ulysses, with Alice Donut, Victim's Family, all of these old, weird hardcore bands, brilliant bands. And he would always call and say, "I hear you've got..." So I had a lot of dealings with them, really.
Golden times.
Yeah, amazing. But I touch your lotus feet. And
yes.
God bless you. Take care. Look after yourself.
I will.
Never lose that feeling, baby.
We won't. We'll be rocking. I'll be looking forward to your playlist, actually.
Okay. I hope you enjoy. Give me some feedback and tell me what you think of my record one day. If you ever have a chance to listen to it. I would love to get some feedback from you, but no obligation. But if you feel it, the inclination.
I'll be right on it. I'll be right on it. Okay, look, God bless. Take care.
Take care. Bye.
See you. Bye. And that's me in conversation with Nick Evans, talking about life, love, poetry, and everything else. Anyway, fantastic interview. And yes, indeed. Anyway, this is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. If you want to contact me, you can on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Just do C86 show. All these interviews have been archived, so you can find those on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean, and I think a few others. But anyway, that's fine. Have a great week. Stay safe.